All right, I am going to call this meeting to order at 1 a.m. or 1 p.m. And we're going to do the Napa Valley Transportation Authority Tax Authority first. And let's stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll get you going. All right. Okay. Do we have any board members remotely participating?
We do not.
Good. Could you do a roll call for us?
Bernie Narvaez.
Here.
Liz Alessio. Amber Manfrey. Mark Joseph.
Here, and Amber just walked in, making a dramatic entrance. Very good.
Noted. Pierre Washington. Margie Moeller. Robin McKee. Here. Paul Doring.
Here.
Michelle Deasy. Donald Williams. Kevin Eisenberg.
Present.
And we have a confirmed absence today from Director Sedgley. We do have a quorum.
Perfect. All right. Next is adoption of the agenda, which is a consent item and a regular business item. Do I have a motion?
So moved by Alessio.
Alessio moves.
Second,
McKee seconds. We can just do this by voice vote. Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Perfect. Next is public comment. Do we have any public comment in the audience or online? Okay, you missed out. Any chairperson or board member updates? All right. Any executive director update? All right, again. I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent calendar.
So moved.
I move we accept it.
Second. Williams moves, Eisenberg seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. Regular agenda item 10.1, the quarterly report. Tony, you're on.
Good afternoon, Chair Joseph and members of the board. My name is Antonio Honorado, and I am the Finance Director here for the Napa Valley Transportation Authority. For this item, staff is asking the board to receive the most recent Measure T analysis and a financial update. This is an informational only item, so no action needs to be taken. So Hindenleiter, Delamas, and Associates, which we refer to as HDL, are NVTA's sales tax consultants. They are a firm that specializes in collecting and analyzing Measure T sales tax data. The name may sound familiar to you, as I know several cities, including Napa County, also use HDL for their sales tax reporting needs. So each quarter, HDL provides NVTA newsletter, which is in your attachment, that summarizes current sales tax receipts compared to the same quarter of the previous years. They also deliver a detailed report, which is attachment number 2, that breaks down the industry-specific performance and compares local trends to those across the Greater Bay Area. These materials offer both a snapshot of quarterly activity and a thoughtful analysis into the broader tax trends for the Bay Area and the county. The newsletter and reports are also shared with the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee when they become available. So just to summarize the newsletter, Measure T sales taxes have begun to see the economic pressures realized in other Bay Area counties that they have seen for a little bit of a while now. From October through December, NVTA-TA's receipts were 0.9% higher than the same period as last year. But after you remove the anomalies could be like a catch-up payment or late payment to the Department of Tax and Fee Administration, the CDTFA, actual sales showed a 2.4% decline. 6 of the 10 business types that we track also showed declines. One bright spot was an increase of general consumer goods with the opening of the new Costco in mid-October. Costco is expected to generate up to an additional $500,000 in sales taxes for the region. So it's not a saving grace, but it does make up for some of the losses that we have seen in the past few months. The memo also provides a comparison of staff's internal forecasts of Measure T receipts compared to actuals that have been delivered so far this year. Additionally, in the memo, I provide a forecast of the next 5 years when Measure U becomes operative. This gives a little bit of a planning guide to the jurisdictions that they can plan accordingly to what I believe measure the forecast for when Measure U starts flowing into the county's coffers. The forecast comes with some stipulations. For example, the forecast of the current year was scaled back twice, most recently from 25.2 million to now down to 25 million. The forecast also does not take into account the tariffs and how they would impact Napa County businesses, just because there's no precedent to follow, as well as tariff policy seems to change every few days. So it's hard to get a grasp of what exactly, how that impacts Napa and its industries. I will say that Measure T sales tax generations have been above the $25 million mark for the past 2 years, although it may be a struggle to see us hit that milestone this year, given the instability of the economy. Of course, staff is monitoring the situation almost daily at this point. Just one important note, the current newsletter analysis covers the period from October to December and December 24. And we're in May 2025. So, several months later. While it may seem dated as we are now, in May, this is due to just how the standard reporting timelines. This is a timing issue. Basically, it takes 1 quarter to receive the last quarter's analysis and editing and feedback. So although the analysis is somewhat dated, it does provide, what the actual trends were for the 4th quarter of 2024, which is the 2nd quarter of fiscal year 2025. October through December, that tends to be a slower period for Napa County and for sales tax generations. So it'll be interesting to see what happens between January and March 2025 when the tariffs became a reality, and see how quickly that policy impacts the county and try and make some sense out of what that means for the future. That being said, that concludes my report. This analysis, this newsletter, there are reports also you can peruse in the attachments. And with that, I can answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much for the report. Do we have any questions from the board? Do we have any public comment? All right, well then, nothing online? Okay, then we just will accept that. Thank you for the report. That moves us to item 11, future agenda items. Do we have any future agenda items as it relates to the taxing authority? If not, then I'll say we're adjourned at 1:08 p.m. And we will move to the next one. I'll open the Napa Valley Transportation Authority Board meeting at 1:08. And still no board members remotely participating?
None.
All right. And can we use the last roll call to cover for this one?
I can confirm roll call from the preceding NVTA-TA with 1 absence, and including our PCC representative, Director Smith, we do have a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Adoption of the agenda. Any changes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll move approval of the agenda.
Doring,
Adoption of the agenda.
Doring moves. Narvaez seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Public comment. No public comment online or off.
We do have a hand raised online.
Oops, I apologize. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Carlota Sainato with the Napa County Bicycle Coalition. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to, on behalf of the Napa County Bicycle Coalition, recognize NVTA for being a presenting sponsor of Bike Month this year. We celebrate Bike Month in May in Napa County every year. And some of the highlights of this year so far were our Bike Fest event on May 4th, where we had our largest turnout since the event has returned. We estimate about 1,400 folks. And we had Bike to Work and School Day on May 15th with the most Energizer stations countywide that we have ever had, and a really great turnout, about 1,500 folks coming out for Bike to Work and School Day, which was our highest since 2017, amongst other programs and activities. So we just wanted to present some of these highlights and say thank you to NVTA for both being a presenting sponsor and an active participant in Bike Month. NVTA hosted an infrastructure ride at Bike Fest and hosted a station for Bike to Work and School Day, as well as provided Bike Fest advertising in buses. So we just want to express our appreciation and share some highlights. And that's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think on behalf of the staff who did all the work, I would say I think it was something we enjoy doing, and it's certainly mission aligned.
And I'd just like to add, if I could, that special thanks should go to Diana Meehan and Patrick, who have both, committed themselves to improving alternative transportation modes in Napa, and they were both very active in this month so far. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, we will now move to the chairperson doesn't have anything to report. Any board members to report? How about MTC?
Sure. So, Programming and Allocations Committee for MTC allocated $777,000 and change in Regional Measure 3 funds to NVTA Vine Route 29 services. Next month, they will likely approve another almost $200,000. So that's very positive for us. About $500,000 of the first amount is in lieu of SB 125 funds allocated by the state to address the fiscal cliff that most transit operators are experiencing since the pandemic. And this should allow NVTA to avoid the SB 125 conditional requirements. Let's see, we received a staff presentation about transit-oriented communities policy. The policy does not apply to any of the jurisdictions in Napa County. However, future policy decisions may necessitate that they opt into the policy. So if anyone has questions about that, you're welcome to ask me. And I also got out to do a tour of the Highway 37 route a couple of weeks ago, which was very informative.
Thank you. ABAG, anything there?
Nothing to report on ABAG.
Okay.
We'll be meeting June 20th. As far as the General Assembly.
June
So I'll
20th.
follow up with more information after the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Executive Director's report.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As noted, NVTA hosted an Energizer station on Bike to Anywhere Day from 7 to 9 a.m. And we counted 48 cyclists from around the valley cruising through. We also hosted the MTC photographer a bit, and we went over to, I think Patrick and I made our rounds to a few other Energizer stations. And I got to take my picture with Amber, our commissioner, when I was over at the county site. So it was a fun day. On April 30th, NVTA held a public workshop to receive input on the State Route 29 improvements in American Canyon. And we were pleasantly surprised by the turnout. About 50 people attended the meeting, including NVTA Chair Mark Joseph and NVTA Director Pierre Washington. And then also, I think the rest of the council was also there. Council members Brando Cruz and Melissa LaMattina. I think Council Member Ora was not there. And then also American Canyon Planning Commissioner Eric Altman were there. So it was a big turnout. It was lots of great feedback, and we will consolidate that information, and it will be part of the EIR. In your handouts, there's summarizing some past events as well as sharing upcoming events. And as always, we encourage the board to participate so that members of the public have an opportunity to meet and connect with you. Lots of information on other things going on. Staff have started focusing on the intersection of State Route 29 and Jameson Canyon and Airport. And I think for those people who travel through there, they recognize that Soskel's working just fine, but everything gets stuck at that intersection, which we knew was going to happen. We have been working with a consultant to understand if we can amend the environmental document that Caltrans completed as part of the Jameson Canyon project well over 10 years ago. And during these efforts, it became more and more clear that we should consider additional alternatives rather than a grade-separated roundabout type configuration, which is similar to what we completed at Soskel Junction. That improvement could be well over $100 million, and by the time it goes to construction. So we have inside the office been brainstorming other ideas, and then we had also some unsolicited ideas from outside consultants, and they have they could potentially significantly reduce congestion and at the same time come in at a much lower cost. So we're switching gears and have released a request for proposals for an alternative analysis for that intersection, as well as the intersection at Kelly and Jameson. And this will help us complete both the, create understanding what are more viable alternatives, and also complete the environmental document. That award should be returning to NVTA board or in either June or July. So stay tuned for that. And I think Grant will have more information about that. In other news, we have some really good news and exciting news. Soskel Junction is a finalist for the 2025 California Transportation Foundation Interchange Project of the Year Award. The California Transportation Foundation is a nonprofit organization that raises funds for scholarships to provide financial resources to families of Caltrans employees who have lost their lives in the line of duty. The awards that CTF put out each year are California's preeminent awards in transportation. The winner will be announced at the CTF Awards Gala on June 12th, and NVTA how often this happens. NVTA won a CTA award along with Solano Transportation Authority and Caltrans for Jameson Canyon in 2015, so 10 years ago. And then in 2017 for the NVTA-TA Vine Trail project. So fingers crossed that we will also receive an award for Soskel Junction. And then finally, I wanted to share with you some interesting information. Again, more about its bike month, and so we wanted to continue to promote it, and it really is showing or reflecting how the city and the county, all the cities in the county are all working towards providing infrastructure, and it's really obvious to us that the more we build the infrastructure, the more people ride. One indicator of this is that last fall, NVTA partnered with the city of Napa to install a bike and ped counter on the newly constructed State Route 29 undercrossing. Has everybody gone under that? It's in between California and it comes out at First on the Browns Valley side. If you haven't done it, it's a really great and was a very expensive, it's over $2 million to do that because it was already an underpassing, but the city recently made it very functional and easy to navigate. So the city and NVTA put in equipment which detects direction, speed, type of user, and in the 6 months since the counter was installed, 32,500 users have been detected with an average of 184 people per day on weekdays. So on average, 52% of the users are bicyclists, 40% are pedestrians, and 8% are riding scooters. Use appears to be increasing, and one of the great benefits of permanent counters is allowing us to see long-term trends, including seasonal variation or the change in use driven by nearby projects. For State Route 29 undercrossing, NVTA will be watching for how improvements, namely a Class 4 facility for bikes on Browns Valley Road and newly constructed nearby affordable housing projects affect active transportation use in the area. This data helps NVTA and our jurisdiction partners to advocate for funding for future projects and to compete for limited grant funding. NVTA has committed to an ongoing bike ped counter program, budgeting sufficient funds to purchase 2 counter systems annually, with local jurisdictions covering installation costs, and staff is currently working with American Canyon and Calistoga to identify locations for the current detectors. So with that, I conclude my report and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board? Well, there is one thing I forgot to mention, so I'll mention it now. I just wanted to recognize that Kate Miller is receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award at the upcoming Women's Transportation Seminar. Well, it's the same.
Yeah, my joke is all you have to do is retire or die and you're going to get an award.
Hey, it's still it's still an impressive recognition. And so I just wanted to highlight for the record that she is going to receive that. It's going to be in Oakland on June 5th. So congratulations. And I would,
You all make it easy for me to look good.
and vice versa, I'm sure, because a lot of times I don't look good even with your help. So I appreciate it. Okay, now we're going to run to the consent items. No, wait, we're going to do Caltrans update. I make so many notes, I don't see the agenda anymore. Are we there?
Caltrans is not on Zoom, so we can continue to the next item.
We're going to skip the Caltrans update. Let's move to number 9, consent agenda items. Do I have a motion to accept the consent calendar?
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
All right. Motion by Doring,
I'll second.
second by Alessio. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. Next, item 10.1, Napa Valley Transportation Authority Agreement number 25-C27 for the position of Executive Director. Whee! Okay. This is one of those awkward moments. As hey, after what, 3 or 4 months of a lot of work, the board went through, solicited a number of candidates with the help of Ralph Anderson and Associates. We did interviews, we narrowed the field, we negotiated a contract, and I am happy to announce that Danielle Schmidt is going to be our new executive director effective July 1, providing the board approves the contract that's in your packet. That's the extent of my report, and happy to answer any questions. It is exciting just because, it's a transition that is, I'm hoping will go very smoothly, and we're all looking excited and looking forward to everything. And somebody should butt in before I keep
Chair,
rambling.
can I say a few words?
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
No, thank you. You're a great chair and appreciate everything. No, I just want to say we're very excited. I'm very excited that Danielle applied for this position. She's been with this agency for a very long time, 3 executive directors, but she's a leader in her own right. And I've seen that in action. So Danielle, we're looking forward to working with you in this position. We'll be missing Kate, but we know where she lives. We know her number. We know how to track her down. I think we have a GPS on her just in case. But no, really, congratulations and thank you very much.
Any other comments from the board? Any online comments? Any comments from the executive director?
I have every confidence that Danielle's going to be brilliant in this new position. And I think the staff is universally excited about this appointment and at the same time also relieved because the team work really well together, and Danielle is 95% of that leadership now, and I'm sure she's going to be wonderful in this new position. And she knows where I am if she needs any moral support or advice. I don't think she does, but if she does, she knows where I am. And congratulations, Danielle.
Right. We do have public comment.
The lobbying begins.
Steve Lederer, Public Works Director, Napa County. I just wanted to say that I've seen Danielle grow in her career from part-time help in, I think, 2007, if I have that right. And Danielle's career and I have crossed a number of times since then, and I think you guys made a great decision. And as a member agency, we look forward to working with her. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. If there are no comments from the board and none from the public, I think, Oz, do you need to make any announcement for the record? Okay. Oh, okay. Then I'll entertain a motion to accept the employment agreement with Danielle Schmidt.
I'll make a motion to move item 10.1 on the agenda.
I'll second.
Moved by Narvaz, seconded by Alessio.
Okay. A motion was made and seconded to approve an employment agreement with Danielle Schmidt to serve as NVTA's Executive Director effective July 1, 2025. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54953C3, prior to taking final action, the board shall orally report a summary of the recommendation for final action on salaries and other compensation to be paid to an executive. The employment agreement before the board is for a term of 3 years with an annual salary of $250,000, a vehicle allowance of $600 per month, and a deferred compensation match of up to $3,500 each year. All other terms and conditions of employment are consistent with NVTA's adopted policies. The board may now take action.
Perfect. And I believe this is a voice vote or, okay. Then we have it moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, perfect. Congratulations. All right. Well, now, Danielle, did you want to make any remarks just to put you on the spot and embarrass you? Because I think that's the real prerogative of the board chair, is to embarrass people.
Yes, I mean, I just would, I'm very appreciative of the board, and I'm honored that you've trusted me to lead the agency in the next chapter. I have every confidence in the dedicated staff and team I have behind me and the mentorship I've received from the current executive director, Miller. So I'm looking forward to it. I mentioned this in my interview, but this is more than just a job to me. This is also my community, my career, my lifetime work. So I'm looking forward to it, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that, we will move on to item 10.2, TDA Article 3, Guidelines and Call for Projects. Patrick, it'll be a tough act to follow, but I know you're up for it.
Just going to say that. So
You
you
already
took
got
the
one
words out of my mouth.
Too.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and members of the board. Patrick Band, planner with NVTA, here to present item 10.2, Transportation Development Act, Article 3, Guidelines and Call for Projects. The TDA 3 program is a program that is funded through approximately 2% of the quarter-cent statewide sales tax measure that is implemented under the 1971 Transportation Development Act. That funds bicycle and pedestrian projects throughout Napa County. This call for projects will allow local jurisdictions to apply for approximately $470,000 in anticipated funding over the next 2 years. We have made some changes in the guidelines subsequent to the last call for projects that we did a year ago, recognizing that we did not receive as many applications as we had liked. So we made some modifications, clarified particularly the quick build side of things, which allows for local jurisdictions to quickly implement small projects on a kind of temporary basis prior to more permanent infrastructure being built out on a longer time frame. Applications for this will be due to NVTA by 5 p.m. on Monday, July 7th, with applications going between the NVTA-TA, the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, the TAC, and then back to this body for final approval and allocation of funds in September of 2025. Happy to answer any questions folks might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Is the application process limited to just the jurisdictions, or could it be other entities in Napa County, for instance, the Vine Trail or those kinds of operations?
So applications do need to be submitted by jurisdiction. But they can certainly be done in partnership or in collaboration with nonprofits or other entities such as the Vine Trail, Bicycle Coalition, et cetera.
All right, thank you.
Director Williams.
Yes, thank you for the report. And I presume the jurisdictions are all notified about this when
That
the
is
call
correct.
goes out. That amounts to an official notification. Do they normally acknowledge your message that grants are available, or do sometimes they slip by, the Public Works folks there, or how do you know that they received them?
So prior to this item coming to the board today, the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, was notified and voted to approve and recommend adoption to this board. Additionally, the same guidelines were reviewed and recommended for adoption to this board by the Active Transportation Advisory Committee of NVTA. So both of those entities have reviewed, recommended. We'll do additional follow-up and encouragements to local jurisdiction staff to submit applications by the deadline. I can't speak to what constraints local staff may have in terms of whether they choose to apply or not. It is a fairly limited amount of funding, only $470,000 over 2 years. So that is always a consideration, but these funds can be utilized to kind of fill that last little gap or get smaller projects kind of up and running, utilizing these funds for preliminary engineering, permitting, things of that sort.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Quick one.
Okay.
What's the sunset on this? So somebody applies, they awarded the $470,000. When does it need to be spent by?
So the 470 can be divided among multiple jurisdictions, and often
Okay.
that's the case. So in the case of what I mentioned, those quick build projects, we've set an internal guideline cap of $50,000. So that could be, small curb extensions on a neighborhood street, for example, things of that sort. In terms of the timeline to expend funds, jurisdictions have a 3-year period to spend those dollars. And then they can either be reallocated to a different jurisdiction if they're not allocated, or jurisdictions can apply for an extension as well.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Any public comments? Nope. All right. I'll entertain a motion to accept these guidelines and call for projects. Right. Heisenberg moves.
I'll second.
Williams seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. We are on 10.3. Napa Valley Transportation Authority Agreement Number 25-CO4 with Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, and Roch.
Hello again.
You again.
So for this item 10.3, staff is asking the board to authorize the executive director or designee to execute and make minor changes to agreement 25-CO4 with Stradling Corp., which is attachment 1 in your board packet, for bond disclosure and tax advisory services for a period of up to 6 years and an amount not to exceed $300,000 for actual services rendered. That's important. So for this item and the contract that follows the board's approval for March 2025 for financial advisory services for Measure U. As we look ahead to potential bonding related to the Measure U capital program, staff issued a competitive request for proposals for bond counsel, disclosure counsel services, and tax advisory services on January 2nd, 2025. So our goal was to secure a qualified legal firm that can support NVTA-TA's, the tax agency's objective of issuing debt efficiently, effectively, and in full compliance with legal and tax requirements. So as you can imagine, bond counsel plays a critical role in public financing. They draft authorizing documents and disclosure documents, advising on IRS regulations, and issues legal opinions that affirms the validity of those bond issuances, the securities behind it, and the tax exempt status of those bonds. Legal opinions not only provide necessary assurances to us as the issuer, but also instills confidence in investors. The RFP was publicly advertised via NVTA's website, the Napa Valley Register, and publicpurchase.com, with direct outreach to known firms. 4 qualified California-based law firms submitted proposals. An evaluation committee scored the proposals based on the technical merits and value. Evaluation criteria included understanding of the work, relevant experience, and staffing qualifications, and of course, costs. K&N, NVTA's financial advisors provided guidance and their expert opinion of each firm, but did not score or endorse any of the firms that submitted a proposal. Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, and Roth received the highest scores. This was confirmed through an interview with the top two firms, Stradling as well as a Hawkins group. So the contract is a not to exceed amount of $300,000 over a 6-year period, which for the same period of which is the same period of performance for the financial advisors, our financial advisors, K&N. The $300,000 should be adequate to provide the required legal assistance for up to 2 bond issuances if the tax agency approves that, as well as any legal matters that are provided on an hourly basis. I chose a 6-year contract, which is the same as the financial advisors, because in the first 5 years, at the end of the 5-year term of Measure U, we have a 5-year look back, a look behind, a comprehensive look back, as well as a 5-year look forward. So in that 5th year, I would like to have the financial advisors and bond counsels to stand at the ready for any kind of planning purposes and not have to reissue another RFP for new financial advisors or new bond counsel, which is the reason why it's a 6-year contract instead of a 5-year or 4-year contract. Just I wanted to have that continuity in case we decide to make changes to the Measure U program for the next cycle. So that's why I chose a 6 years and a not to exceed of $300,000. So that should give us adequate cushion for up to 2 bond issuances if the tax agency in their capacity chooses to issue debt based on the local jurisdictions, or as well as NVTA issuing debt for its highway projects. That being said, that concludes my report, and I can answer any questions you may have at this time.
Okay. I appreciate the report, and I appreciate the strategic aspect of making sure you've got somebody there when that next look forward is, because hopefully interest rates will come down and it'll be a little more interesting to consider financing to make these improvements, whereas right now it's not as exciting. So thank you.
Right, the environment's not as attractive right now, but we intend to do some scenario analysis with our financial advisors to see what the most opportune time may be in the future, in the near future here.
Okay, great. Any other comments?
Just a quick comment. I appreciate the approach that you took. It seemed very fair and equitable. And there's only a 2-point spread between the top Stratings. I think it's Hawkins. And so therefore you had another process. You just didn't assume those 2 points that was going to give you the best and most qualified, and that you went through and you did an additional step of a 1-hour interview with those top 2.
Yeah, we did a 1-hour interview, and what it came down to was fit and their approach with our agency and past experiences. And Stradling had the best approach, and they've had experience with other transportation planning agencies and tax agencies similar to NVTA. So they were just considered. We were more comfortable with Stradling as bond counsel than we were with the other firm.
Thank you. On that, I'm happy to, unless there's any other comments or concerns, I'm happy to make a motion to approve staff recommendation on this item 10.3.
Second.
Enduring seconds.
One
Chair.
comment. Chair. Just following up on that. I'm fine with your recommendation. It looks just fine. And I'm just interested in the process, and I think I appreciate it. It looks like there were 4 evaluators and each has 100 points to assign. And so the maximum score would have been 400 if each evaluator thought that the candidate was ideal in every way.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's what
That looks like that.
the point spread came out.
I'm just doing the arithmetic here, and I'm interested in that, and it looks fine to me. But I'm just interested in how that works out. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and the only comment I'll make, I think staff made it, is that isn't to spend 300 grand. That's only if we choose to have up to 2 bond issuances. So
for actual services rendered.
Right.
So each bond issuance is more or less around $110,000 per issuance. And then you have tax advisory services as well as disclosure services as well.
Perfect. All right. Well, we do have a motion and a second. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, very good. Then we're on to 10.4. The Accessible Transportation Needs Assessment Plan Adoption.
Good afternoon, Chair Joseph, members of the board, Diana Meehan. This is item 10.4, Accessible Transportation Needs Assessment Plan Adoption. The Accessible Transportation Needs Assessment is a study we've worked on for this past year, looking at barriers to mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities, with the goal to find equitable transportation solutions for those groups. The primary 6 implementation strategies will be the first that we focus on. And while the plan identified numerous different strategies, these first 6 are the ones that we'll be investigating and working towards in this first year after the plan adoption. And those include partnering with our healthcare providers to enhance transportation access to medical. That was one of the key barriers identified within the plan. Napa County is identified as a medical desert with just 2 hospitals and limited access to medical within the county, requiring that people travel outside the county for their services. Expanding non-NVTA transportation options to increase service availability. Some of these are already underway, and that's a result of the Napa County Older Adults Assessment, such as expansion of Molly's Angel services. They have a new program that they're just kicking into gear, and other programs are also following suit. Improving access to medical facilities in neighboring counties. And while we do provide some service to the city of Vallejo, to Kaiser, we don't provide any service to other facilities outside the county other than that. So we'll be investigating what those services might look like. Establishing a dedicated mobility manager is another thing that we'll be looking into, and formalizing a dedicated implementation working group, which will be made up of decision makers with some of these organizations that we'll partner with, such as medical providers. And finally, enhancing public awareness and outreach to seniors and individuals with disabilities, so they have a good understanding of what their transportation options are and how to access those. The board received a presentation on the plan in March. And the draft was available for public comment through April 11th. We did not receive any additional comments to that draft plan, I'm happy to report. And the Paratransit Coordinating Council met and reviewed the draft plan at their May 8th meeting and recommended that the board approve this plan. And while we get to the end of a planning process, and it seems like, you know, a letdown when we get to that point, that's not the end of what we're doing with this. This is just the beginning of where we're headed, working towards strategies that are within the plan. And that concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Can you talk a little bit more about the mobility manager? Lay that out a little bit more,
Sure,
a little
this
bit more detail. Would that be an employee of NVTA or
Yeah, sure.
something
Well,
separate?
you know, that's a good question, and that's being addressed. This is something that has come up previously, that MTC puts together something called a Coordinated Transit Services Plan. This is, I think, all transit agencies are required, or each MPO is required to do this. This is something that happens throughout the state. That sort of trickles down to our community-based transportation plan, looking at services for people in those communities and people with disabilities, limited English proficient, all sorts of things. And one of the things that they've called out in the past plan and also this current coordinated plan for the region is to have a dedicated mobility manager in the county, somewhere in the county. Somebody has to oversee all the accesses and resources. And I don't know, the County of Napa, again, under the Napa County Older Adults Assessment, has formed something called Connections Napa County. This is, it's called the ADRC, and I'm blanking on the acronym. Devereaux, help me if you can remember what that is.
ADRC is for Aging and Disability Resource Centers, and it's a common institution in every county in the state that at the state level are trying to really make sure it's in each county. And so those organizations are rolling up now.
Exactly.
I do want to add, Solano County does have a dedicated mobility management system, and it's really great. It's
They
really
do,
effective.
and I think they operate that through their CTA. So, you know, we are the transit operator here, but there are lots of other resources and other transportation services that operate within the county. A dedicated mobility manager would be the overseer or, you know, be coordinating transportation services for all transportation, not just public transit, which is what we operate. So the goal of that is that there's no wrong door when somebody makes a call or shows up for transportation services anywhere they land, that this dedicated mobility manager would be able to point them in the right direction so that they have information and access to all services that are available to someone so that they would be able to lead them in the right direction.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
ADRC, branded in Napa County as Connections, is an evolution of information and assistance that's housed under the county HHS department. So just, no one's starting from scratch. It's just some growth.
Excellent. Any other comments?
Just gonna clarification. I was on this committee and thank you for letting me be a part of it. And just as a refresher, this was something that that reaffirms what the Area Agency on Aging for Napa Solano County have found in their needs assessment. Also, I think it's the Napa County Adult Aging Commission. I'm getting I get the names mixed up once in a while, but it's consistent and it just kind of narrows in that really the healthcare aspect. And this really is, you know, this is for our older adults, those with mobility issues, those with different, you know, limited abilities. And so one, I appreciate the work. Two, I do think, and maybe Diane, you can confirm that now that we have this, we may be eligible for some grants and some funding to help implement some of these or see these through. Is that correct?
We certainly hope so.
Because I believe that some of our neighboring counties had one in play and they were able to be awarded some significant dollars in support. So that's also another benefit to this plan. Thank you for your leadership.
Any other comments? Any public comments? Right. Well, that being the case, I'll entertain a motion to accept the Accessible Transportation Needs Assessment Plan.
So moved.
Alessio moves.
I'll second.
Manfree seconds. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Perfect. Next, 10.5, bind transit frequency and coverage discussion.
I'm going to kick this off if I can. Whoops, I just wanted to remind the board that we have been talking a lot about what it is that we can do to increase riders on transit. A lot of the discussion has focused on fares, and we recognize, given the cost of our fares, which are relatively low, that it's not going to have the sort of influence that we hope, and it doesn't come to the top when we do surveys. And so we have met separately with directors Mueller and Sedgley to sort of, you know, understand what kinds of things we could do. And one of the things that always comes to the top on surveys is frequency and directness. So with that, we went back to the drawing table and Rebecca will share with you our findings.
Thank you, Director Miller and Chair Joseph and members of the board. My name is Rebecca Schenk and I'm the transit manager here at the Napa Valley Transportation Authority. And this will be a kind of a continuation of our frequency conversation. So on the next slide, just our agenda for today, we're going to go through one particular special event, kind of talk about our short-term goals the transit staff and the executive staff here have outlined for the current calendar year that we're in. And then we'll kind of talk through kind of our route costs and revenues to get at this, like what routes of ours are most efficient, where are we spending and where are we gaining revenue. And then we'll talk a little bit more about and I often will use kind of ridership and frequency interchangeably throughout this, but the idea of how can we build ridership by increasing frequency versus what are the trade-offs in terms of coverage? Because if we maybe increase service on one route, right, it might mean we're discontinuing another route and cutting off transit service. So there's lots of trade-offs we'll go through. And then at the end, we'll go through proposed changes for August of 2025. That would be our next schedule change, August 10th, right before school starts. So with that, we'll touch first on the fun special event. So NVTA did sponsor, and you'll see on the next slide, a bus rap contest. We got solicitations and from 27 different artists to design a rap for 2 of our new electric Gillig buses that are currently on the line in Livermore. This is the design of our winner, Blanca Milana, and we're really excited about this. We're working out the details. Don't worry, it won't actually cover the windows or the brake lights, etc. The design will be finalized then. But we thank Director Smith and some members of our CAC and members of the TransDev staff for helping us evaluate all these different artist installments, and we thank Blanca for coming up with such a nice thing. So in July, we'll go ahead and we'll be wrapping the bus, and then we'll probably, as part of a larger art event, and unveil the bus. Okay, so to the point of today, I mentioned we're going to talk first on short-term transit goals. So on the next slide, each year, right, since and over the last 4 years that I've been transit manager, we essentially outline goals for each year. So the goals are in different categories, including VineGo, which is our ADA paratransit, Vine, our fixed route service, and that also kind of includes some of the shuttles, marketing and planning, capital projects, and then bus upgrade. So we make sure that we have the necessary buses that we need to run all of those different services. So the ones that you see there in orange are things we've accomplished so far this year. We put this out kind of on the calendar year, so in January. And then on the next slide, I'll just talk about one, I think, in each of the categories. So in terms of VineGo with Trapeze, we've been made it available to a pilot group. Trapeze is the software we use to utilize and plan our VineGo trip. So now if you were a rider, let's say I made a ride and I am waiting for my bus, I'll be able to see it on VineGo, similar to what we do on Vine. And then also if you are the care attendant and you want to know when your person you're taking care of is going to be home, you could also track that ride to make sure you're there right when they arrive and maybe not too before or not too far after in order to make your time use sufficient. So we did that to a pilot group and we're now unveiling it to that larger group. In terms of Vine, we did institute the fixed route A from on demand, and we've seen a ridership jump over this quarter that's kind of outlined in the board report there. And we also want to look at starting Saturday service on the Route 29 that goes to El Cerrito del Norte. We'll talk about this in a little more detail, but we do have some RM3 funding, as Director Manfrey had mentioned, that's been allocated to us from MTC, and we're looking to seek some additional outside funding to make that happen later this year. In terms of marketing, we did do our bus wrap competition that I just showed you, and then in September, we're going to do a little naming contest. We got to come up with a good name for the bee in Yountville and the butterfly in St. Helena and the hawk, and we're going to use elementary school students to help us name those. In terms of capital projects, we did install and are currently commissioning additional chargers at our bus maintenance facility for our new electric Gillig buses that are coming, and also have it now available for personal vehicles. So we're making progress on that capital side. And then in terms of bus upgrades, we did receive 4 new to us 5310 vehicles, which is like an ADA vehicle. And we use the 5310 as the federal funding. But we're constantly in the need for additional vehicles. We have funding for 4 more and need to look for additional, because besides those 4 that we just got, every other VineGo vehicle we have is beyond its 7-year useful life. So that's a big emphasis on our part. So those are our short-term goals. And then what I want to talk through, starting on the next slide, is kind of set the stage for our longer-term goals. So what you're going to see here is our fixed route costs, right, on a per route basis. So the Route D, which we operate roughly every hour, right, mainly on weekdays and some a little bit less on Saturdays, for example, low mileage, it just goes about 3 miles down the road, that whole loop. So its costs, right, makes sense, low mileage, low frequency of that vehicle. its costs are low over the second quarter. But something like the Route 10, right, that we operate 7 days a week and we have 4 buses on kind of at our peak periods, right, is much more expensive and we're going a lot further distance, right? We're going all the way up to Calistoga. So it kind of checks based upon that mileage and number of buses on that particular trip equates to higher costs. And since this is the quarterly number, for example, to kind of keep it in perspective, right, it's a little over $1 million to operate then on each month. And then on a yearly basis, right, wrapping that up a little over $12 million for the year for those fixed route operating costs. And that includes not just the Transdev contract, right, but fuel and NVTA staff overhead costs. On the next slide, you'll see the same thing, right, for on-demand costs, right? So St. Helena and Yountville both have the least amount of service overall from our group, and all each operate 1 vehicle. Calistoga operates 2 for part of the year, American Canyon 2 for the whole year, right? And then Vingo is covering the whole, all of the incorporated jurisdictions and some of the incorporated area. So again, highest cost, highest mileage, most vehicles. So then what we're going to see next, right, is we're going on the next slide, take into account, I should say, revenue. And so on that next slide, what you're going to see is the revenue from each of these. So let's just take that Route 10, for example, right? That was our most expensive route, but it also brings in our most revenue, right? It's our highest ridership route and such. And so then when you kind of go all the way over to the right column, it's kind of a subsidy per passenger. So what does it cost us to operate that route minus the fares that we have received? So on something, for example, on the Route C, right, for each rider, we're roughly paying, when you group everything up, $16.52 per rider. So those first 4 in turquoise there essentially are most efficient routes, right? Those are the ones where we are subsidizing passengers the least, and either our revenue is high and or our costs are low, right? And we see a trade-off there. Then when we get down to the bottom, right, something like the Route 11X, right, is our least efficient route and the one we're going to focus on some today in terms of, right, how do we maybe allocate those resources differently because our ridership is so low and our costs relatively high related to those ridership. So we want to relook at that. We'll also focus on the Route E, which is like our least productive local route. You can obviously see the Route 21 there. Because we receive separate funding sources for that, including a contribution from the Solano Transportation Authority, we're looking to maintain a route like that because if we don't operate that route any longer, we don't have that additional funding in play. And on the next slide, you'll see, again, kind of going from best to worst, doing the same thing on the subsidy per passenger as it relates to our shuttles. So American Canyon, which we know is essentially at pre-COVID ridership rate, has our lowest kind of cost of subsidy per passenger. But then when we look at the Yountville B would be of our shuttles, kind of our least efficient, and then followed by Vingo. Vingo is federally mandated under the American with Disabilities Act, and so that's not something that we can change, but we can look at some options, particularly with the Yountville B. So on the next slide, what you'll see is this kind of our current schedule, right, and our current routes. And so we're really focused on coverage. We're trying to cover basically all of the incorporated jurisdictions. The focus here, as you see on the screen there, is the city of Napa, but we're making sure we go up to Calistoga, we're going down to American Canyon through Vallejo and making those key connections at Sassoon until the El Cerrito Del Norte BART station. So basically we're giving access to more residents. We're covering both high and low density areas. We're doing service to all political districts, all jurisdictions, and then we're giving mobility to kind of the transit dependent because they don't maybe need to go only to the most efficient place, right? They need to be able to travel along the valley. And so we kind of have more of a coverage model now, and we'll talk about kind of the trade-offs. So we were going to focus more on frequency to increase our ridership. So on the next slide, you'll see different things to take into consideration, right, when we're route planning. We need to take into consideration operating costs and funding, which we've talked about. And then we also need to take into effect driver availability. There are a bunch of work rules associated with when and how long they can drive and how many breaks they take, similar to trucking. And then we also need to take into effect Title VI, which is a federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And so there is a formal Title VI analysis that's done whenever we make any type of major schedule change to make sure that we're not disproportionately impacting any of the groups covered under that Title VI law. So with that kind of lens in mind, we'll go to show a piece of software that actually you approved us utilizing more today. And my colleague Dexter is going to help me kind of demonstrate that. So we use this software and we're trying to say, hey, what would it mean if we made a change? What would it mean to population? What would it mean to minority populations? What would it mean in terms of trip time or availability? And so this is the Remix platform. So we're going to try this in real time. And we're going to try basically 3 things. So there's a little character in this, and it's called Jane, right? I mean, pick your name, right? But you can pick basically, and you can put Jane in this case. We're going to first put her at the Redwood Park and Ride, for example. So we're going to scoot her a little bit left. And what it's going to tell us is if you were Jane, right, and it was, we'll go ahead and change that to 7 a.m. on a weekday morning. So if it was 7 a.m. on a weekday morning and you were going to be at the Redwood Park and Ride and you were going to take transit, okay, so in that dark blue, that shows you how far you could get in 15 minutes, right? So you can make your way up Solano and you could basically come down Jefferson to just kind of north of where we are now, just north of First Street there. So that's kind of your 15 to 30 minute scenario. And then at the further outer edges, if you were at the Redwood Park and Ride and you had an hour, where could you get? So as we continue to zoom out, you'll see from there, you could get out to Yountville, right? But not as far as St. Helena within an hour. And if you're looking south, right, you could get kind of into that Devlin Road Airport complex, as well as far south as American Canyon, right? But not so far as to make it to Vallejo, for example. And then if we were to move our little character Jane there and we move her to the transit center here, right? And let's say, what is it, 2 o'clock roughly? So if we were at 2 o'clock and we changed the time, it also gives you a sense of where you could get within that time frame. So you can cover a larger section of the city of Napa, say, and that 15 to 30 minute time frame, right? But you're not going to make it to Yountville if you zoom out, and you're not going to make it or you do make it to Yountville, I lied. Okay, you make it to Yountville still, but you do not make it as far south as the city of American Canyon. So these are things that we take into account in terms of travel times and trying to kind of more compete with the other modes of transit. The other thing we can do with this is, you know, we're working on the community-based transportation plan, right? And so we'll go ahead and we're going to not go to minorities yet. We'll go to communities of concern. And so communities of concern are defined by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And based upon census tracts, this is what they tell us are our communities of concern based upon a number of different factors related to income and availability of cars, for example. So these are census tracts. And so it shows us, okay, in the city of Napa, we really need to focus on maintaining service in these communities of concern. So things like, okay, the Route D, which conveniently is a high performing route there in yellow, but then also on the other side of town, making sure we maintain that Route B because that's another community with lower incomes, higher minority population, and low car ownership. And then finally, the thing that I'll show if we turn off the community of concerns layer and we go into minority populations, right? Again, usually based off the most recent ACS, the American Community Survey, right? Again, at the tract level, it will tell us where we have a higher or lower proportion of minorities. And then this is one of the factors that we look at in the Title VI analysis to see if we're disproportionately impacting any one minority group, for example, if we made one schedule change. So thanks so much, Dexter, for kind of showing what that looks like. And so we'll no more live versions, but we'll go ahead on the next slide and say, hey, you know, using the tool that we have, Remix, and thank you for extending that for another 3 years. There on slide 14, what you'll see is, okay, what would it mean, for example, that 11X, right? The existing 11X is there, I guess on the, well, it's on the, yeah, on the right. And that's the existing route. And so we know that's unproductive. We know we have very low ridership. We basically have 2 riders on each of those 5 to 6 trips per day. And so, okay, but we know the 11, right? We know a lot of people, it's a popular route, and we have over 20 people a day that ride that. So knowing what we know on the Route 11, we know people want to go to the Saskell Gateway Transit Center, the Napa Valley College, and then to transfer stations in Vallejo and Sereno. So what we're suggesting is that we would make a change in August potentially to kind of discontinue the Route 11X as it stands, and whether it's the Route 11X Limited or we want to come up with a different name, that's up for debate. But we would make additional stops along the way. So we would stop at the ones in Turquoise, and we would discontinue stopping at the Amola Park and Ride in this case. And we think based upon the number of trips that we could offer per day, because these are cost neutral moves, right? We could offer 6 additional trips per day, and at 20 riders on each of those trips compared to 2, we could increase our ridership by making this change. And you'll see in terms of estimated ridership by about 36,000 riders per year. So this is one change that we could look at. On the next slide, you'll see another set of trade-offs. Okay, we know that the Yountville B was our least efficient shuttle service. So let's say what would happen if, for example, there's 3,700 hours, right, that we operate on the Route B, if we would, for example, use that to go to basically service every 40 minutes north and south on the Route 10. And so it would be really no changes in terms of population and income, because we would be still serving Yountville with the Route 10. It'd be a different service, but we would still be serving Yountville, so it doesn't change that much. We would need some additional vehicles because the vehicles have to travel a lot greater distance, so we couldn't use, say, 1 vehicle to increase those trips. We'd need 3 additional vehicles, and then we do think we could have an estimated ridership increase of around 21,000 based upon our per trip Route 10. So you kind of get the pattern here. We're going to compare current routes, and then we're going to compare the change in terms of population, income, minority, number of vehicles, which is VOMs, vehicles operating in maximum service, and then ridership. And so then you could go to some more extremes, right, as you'll see on the next slide. And maybe this is a little bit more, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. This is a little more information on the Route B, because you could, or the Yountville B. This is like, hey, if we don't cut that complete service, what day could you cut? Although there's really consistent throughout the week, Monday might be your lowest day. And so that's something to consider. If you were maybe to say, okay, we're not ready in a position right now to cut the entire Yountville B service and change to the Route 10, is there a particular day? And we could take those resources and put it into the Route 10. So now, sorry, the next scenario, another set of trade-offs would be, okay, that 11x dollars, as opposed to putting into this, we're calling 11x limited, could we put them into the Route C, for example? So here, that's showing that we wouldn't get as much increase in ridership if we went to every 20-minute service on the Route C using those. So we'd maybe gain about 6,000 riders as opposed to closer to 36,000 if we made that other change. Then on the next slide, another proposal would be, okay, if we discontinued, for example, the Route E that goes up to Vintage High School and Clinical Lay, which is our least performing local route, and then we focused more of those resources from the E and then the A going out to Browns Valley strictly on the C and the D, which are highest performing routes. But what we kind of see there, we actually do end up serving more minority and low income people. So we wouldn't run into a Title VI problem. We'd be serving more, not less. But our ridership increase, again, maybe not as high as what we're looking for. We think we'd get about a 7,000 person increase in ridership. So some of these local routes, you don't get as good of a trade-off as if you put more dollars into these regional routes. So then on the next slide would be, I guess, what we'll call the most severe if we made a change to go, okay, all in on ridership and frequency, right? And we would just have those 4 most productive routes essentially, right? So we would have C, D, 10, and 11. But there would be on this side kind of major Title VI implications because we wouldn't be, say, serving that community of concern in Westwood and some other lower income neighborhoods. But we could lead, right, to increase in ridership, we think overall. The question would become, would still use the system at all if it wasn't as close to their household. So we're not recommending that you'd want to make this drastic of a change, but it just kind of shows what's on the table. It would definitely cause us some issues in terms of the population that we're now serving, right? We would leave basically 33,000 people or so without transit service that currently have that transit service. And so on the final slide, for this trade-off summary, we're just trying to look at the different options. So at this point, staff would recommend making that trade-off in terms of the 11X and changing it more to that limited route, putting a few more stops in it, because we know quarter after quarter, right, that route is not performing. And then it just does a comparison of the different scenarios that we ran through. And at the bottom, it says, okay, you know, some of these things, for example, and if we discontinued the Yountville shuttle, be a relatively minor change, we could proceed with basically without a Title VI analysis. More of the other changes would be more major. We'd complete a Title VI analysis that we bring back to you. And then at the end, without doing the full analysis, but it would kind of lead to a Title VI violation, we believe, just based upon the population that we would no longer be serving. And so that's kind of what we've been thinking about in terms of, right, cost neutral. What moves could we do and to make a result? But there is really an alternative model to success. And on the next slide, I've just picked one transit agency. It's the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority. I had no idea where Roaring Fork is, but what it is it's Colorado ski towns, right? It's Aspen, Snowmass. People who are attracting kind of a similar subset, right, who might come visit Napa or might have a second home in a community here as well as a second home there. My one example of this is my husband goes to Aspen, he rides transit. He does not ride transit here, right? They really have pushed people in that direction on their like Route 82, which would be like the equivalent of our Route 29, right? They have the first rural BRT route, so bus rapid trans in the United States, and they offer 30-minute service, right? On the Route 29, we offer like every 70-minute service, right? Things like that. So they really have focused on that. They do receive financial support, right, from the ski industry, which would be like the equivalent of getting funding from potentially like a vintners or a grape growers. They utilize sales tax for transit in particular, and they are looking with a population not all that different than ours of about 4.8 million trips per year. So if we were to take, I guess, that approach in a way of saying, hey, yes, we can make some trade-offs, say like that 11X to these 11 limited, but we don't want to make major cuts to our service, right? On the next slide, you'll see, hey, where else could we maybe go for some funding? So for example, on the left, you'll see in the current fiscal year, we receive funding and they support us in terms of Calistoga, American Canyon, Yountville, and St. Helena. So they make contributions so that we can offer kind of the best service, for example, in their jurisdiction. And they have done that for quite a number of years now. But at this point, right, and we do receive the TDA funds, right, associated with those jurisdictions, like the city of Napa and county, but we do that for the ones above, but we're not receiving, say, general fund money. So would we want to run an experiment, for example, and pilot increasing that Route C, say, in the city of Napa for a 9-month period, say, during the school year? So let's just say August through the end of the school year in June. And if we went from that 30-minute service to 20-minute service and asked the city of Napa to cover basically 15% of that increase, we'd be asking maybe $53,000 from them for that 9-month period. Or the county of Napa, right? We know from the NOAA survey that Diana had referenced and the older adults assessment that the number one thing that seniors in Napa County were looking for was service to the airport. We have service through the airport Monday through Friday, but if you come back on Sunday or on Saturday, right, or leave, then you only got there one way, right? And we left you there basically on the return trip. So using the regional measure 3 funds from we could increase service on Saturdays, and could we again kind of get a 15% operating cost of that for the county of Napa, and then report back at the 3, 6, and maybe 9-month period and say, hey, did that result in the ridership increase you're looking at? If not, that may be the end of that story. But if it did, is that something that we want to continue? And then the only other thing is maybe we could start the conversation, and maybe not for August, but okay, is there the opportunity in Yountville, if we took those Monday hours, for example, which tends to be our lowest ridership day in Yountville, and put them towards the Route 10 instead? And again, ran an experiment, can we then increase our ridership overall by focusing on the Route 10? And then even maybe a longer term play that's really big, for example, in Roaring Fork, is these circulators too. In those cases, right, your different ski destinations, but Silverado Trail is a place where we don't currently have transit funding. And we know we have a lot of visitors. Now, obviously, we have to have it open up to anyone who's a visitor, non-visitor, et cetera, that wants to go along the trail. But are there opportunities to team with, our equivalent of the ski industry to do that? We did receive TID funding for the first time for our Uber late night program that we're operating in the city of Napa. And so could we do that? And for the first time this year, we got funding from Visit Napa Valley to do Bottle Rock free service. So that could be another option. So kind of with that, I think that's all I've got. I want to just open it up for questions and conversation.
Well, my first quick question is, the reason Napa City and Napa County aren't contributing is because they're meeting their fare box ratios. Is that correct, or?
Well, I guess inherently, historically, that was not part of, kind of maybe the original agreement when the JPA was formed. And I would say that right now, right, we're not meeting those fare box recovery ratios, but they've been relaxed since COVID, so we haven't been required to meet them. So maybe yes, historically, but that's not the driving factor now, since we are not meeting them.
Okay, well then I'll be less polite. Why is it that the smaller cities are contributing and the big 800-pound elephants or gorillas aren't? I said that.
I don't know that I have a great answer for that. I don't know if Kate has a better answer, maybe historically, on why the smaller jurisdictions have, contributed and the larger ones have not.
So there was a time when you all operated your own transit systems, and we consolidated, I want to say 2008 maybe-ish. The amount of your TDA revenues that we received were short the total cost of those services. And in addition to that, the ridership doesn't ever meet the fare box recovery. So your contribution is equal to the fare box, except for in Yountville, because they provide free service a little higher. Yeah. It's 10%. So that's the history.
Okay, yeah. My recollection was the smaller cities, or at least American Canyon, was contributing because we weren't meeting our fare box ratio.
Yeah, that's part of it. And also Calistoga contributes towards, because a lot of it is providing services to the visitors through the hotels that are partnering with the chamber to provide free services for the people who are staying in certain hotels.
Yeah, so Calistoga kind of goes above and beyond by offering some of their TID revenue towards having an additional shuttle there. And so that's how they end up getting that second shuttle for a portion of the year when their visitors are rate is higher.
Okay, well, it still leaves the question in my head how the other two aren't, but we won't go there much more than I've gone.
I've asked the same question.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that certainly creates an opportunity where they might be able to help out in some of these experimental runs. So everything is good. All right, any other questions? Let's start with board director.
Thank you for assembling all this data. Very interesting. I just want 2 points I want to clarify. So fare box recovery ratio, that refers to the ratio, the percentages are 2%, 3%, and so on. That refers to the ratio between fare box revenue and cost of providing the service.
Correct, in your overall cost. So what we presented today includes the costs of fuel and NVTA overhead. For the Transportation Development Act, the fare box equation is a little different and doesn't include some of all of those costs. So our fare box recovery ratio for TDA purposes is higher because it doesn't include every cost. But in my presentation today, I wanted to put everything in, everything that you paid for this pen. You know what I mean? It's in there.
Yeah, fair enough. And the second unrelated question, when Jane is there and she takes 15 minutes to get to one zone and 30 minutes to get to the next, And I assume that's using public transportation?
Yes, it's set up there. So you can also, and then it takes into a consideration a walking component. So for example, if you got off the bus, let's just say at 3rd and Brown, right? But you were going to the courthouse, it gives you say, 12 minutes for the transit ride and then the 3 minutes to walk to the courthouse from the bus stop. So public transit plus the walking component that's inevitable on either
It's either
end.
walking or public transportation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Director Mueller.
Again, thank you very much. I love digesting all these
Yeah.
numbers, and once I run them all through, I still, it's difficult to process them all.
Yes.
Where are we really going? What does this all mean? So I'm trying to maybe, but I do appreciate it. I think it gives us little snapshots all over the place of possibilities
Mhm.
rather than necessarily an end result. And I think overall, I think what I've kind of taken away is, really evaluating efficiencies of the system and how you identify or even define efficiencies. We could spend hours on that.
Yes.
But
you
that's
could.
really important too,
Mhm.
to have these conversations. Because I really don't think we spend enough time really talking about a big piece of what NVTA really does
No.
is run these bus systems. So I would like to see a lot more conversations along this line if everybody is like not groaning, it's like, oh no, I can't believe she said that. But I do think it's important. So I think one thing overall that really kind of strikes me is the ridership versus coverage. I think those are two really important questions. A lot of times people do complain about, oh, the bus is empty, there's not many people, but it's really the labor that costs to drive the bus.
Yes.
The big buses, we all kind of know, we get a lot of federal money for that, so might as well have a big bus versus a little bus, although I always prefer the little bus, but I understand the big buses. So I think really, and you gave some minor examples of changing the coverage and some extreme examples. Maybe there's something in between, looking at that. Because one thing we hear from our surveys all the time is, hey, if it ran more often, more people would get on it.
Mhm.
So are there feeder systems that could go into it? So I just think that this is something I would like to see the board focus more on and really understand this because, when the public comes to me and says this, I don't have a good answer. And I think I should.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of smart people around here that kind of can contribute to really kind of evaluating what is the best solution for Napa County. Because, so I think those are kind of maybe sitting down, just overall having, what are our overall goals that we think we might want to have and
Mhm.
test some of these out. You've got the software
Mhm.
that can kind of get you there and we can do some more real-time examples, but and what problems
Mhm.
do we all want to try to solve? They might be all kind of different, but there might be some similarities. So, I think really some more maybe workshops that just kind of focus on this is something I like to see.
It's certainly a lot of data is there. Director Eisenberg.
First, I want to compliment you on being able to give so much information with so much clarity.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate your presentations in general. I'm sort of echoing what Director Mueller said a little bit. I'm most concerned about service to the people who depend on bus service the most. And I think that has to be one of our prime goals. It's not always the most efficient nor the most cost effective. But speaking of cost effectiveness, was I correct that you highlighted a reduction on 11X and an increase in service on 10 as one of the more efficient ways that you could increase ridership, reduce overall?
Yeah, I was looking at the 11X to like the 11. So the itself. Yes, as maybe like the first thing that we would do. So you could also do 11X to 10, but because it would be like kind of serving that same population and the 11 is our second highest performing route, that might be our first move, as well as trying to pursue potentially whether it was other cost cuts to make an 10 increase, because that would be like the next move to make.
Yeah, I was going to reinforce that because it looked like the modifications to 11X had the biggest bang, and it didn't appear to be any real cost, just improve the routing, and there you go.
Take it to where
Yeah.
people want to go, which happens to be the college and downtown Napa. And I think maybe we could run that as the first experiment in August. It's a cost neutral move, and then see 3 months in, what that means for us. And at the same time, potentially looking at some additional funding sources for other experiments.
Exactly. And assuming that those projections are all coming from Remix as well, or?
Essentially, and based upon our ridership data, we can basically say, we can put in our ridership data. So it's not just saying like, oh, it doesn't make like a generalization. It's saying, okay, for each of your trips at these times, you have roughly this many riders. So if you added another trip at that time, it would basically say you would have very similar ridership on that next trip.
Yeah, because what I'm looking at is we also have a target that we're projecting some 30,000 additional passengers. And then we can compare and say we did or we didn't or whatever.
And then basically after 3 months, if you had 9,000 increase in ridership, you're like, all right, well, that's kind of proving, you know what I mean, out. Or if you had 2 or 11, you know what I mean? You'd know how good that was. And we could come back to that number.
Well, that certainly makes sense. And to Director Muller's point, I agree. These are the open-ended discussions, I think, are the ideal for the board because we're kicking around policy and issues and recognizing there's trade-offs. As you pointed out in the extreme case, if all we cared about was, jumping up numbers and making money, we would literally be in violation of federal law. So it's kind of, we need to be able to understand almost everything here are trade-offs and how do we make it right? Director.
Well, I just wanted to emphasize a couple of points. One is, and we kind of moved over the slide pretty quickly, but Rebecca had a slide that showed the variables that go into making decisions about how we deploy service. So it's not ever a one-to-one thing. And that's why we have a remix program as opposed to trying to do this in an Excel spreadsheet, which we did for years. So I just wanted to emphasize that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit, or at least just mention, is that when we eliminate service, we're not only eliminating the service for that route, we're constraining where we provide ADA service. So we legally only have to provide ADA service within 3/4 of our service area. And when we constrain service, we're depriving those areas of ADA service. And then the final thing that I was just going to comment on is I do agree with Director Muller, because we don't talk about this enough, and it is very complex. But one of the things I think might be useful is to have this conversation as part of a budget workshop. So we have a 2-year budget, and I think that would be a really useful discussion. Maybe we bring it to the board a month before we present the final budget numbers for our hearing, and then, so that we're not spending the entire meeting just talking about transit, because we always have a lot of other things for you to approve.
Excellent. Thank you. I think Director Alessio.
Yes, thank you very much. You are a master at this. You've been at it for a long time. And, as Director Eisenberg said, for you to provide this much clarity, and I was really trying hard to follow along. My brain was kind of hurting, to be honest with you, but I really appreciate it.
yeah.
I know, I'm like, okay, I need to practice and play with this a little bit. This is the topic for our community outside the condition of our streets and roads. When it comes to transportation, the long-time frustration is transit, and people don't understand, the general public, the restrictions, the financial restrictions, limitations that we have with this. And what do they say? You make lemonade out of lemons kind of thing with what we have. You know, folks, I'm going to reinstate what we know. Folks want reliability, they want communication, and they want confidence in our transit system. And to do that, we have to have a consistent schedule. We need to provide notification that I know is on one of the goals, is having more of the notification, which is really critical because people don't know whether they should start going to a bus stop or not. And I know there's an app, but it's having those at site notifications that I see in other city, I think is really, really supportive for the ridership and provides, again, more confidence. And more confidence really is also more frequency. Can I rely on me to get there in a timely fashion? And versus driving my own car or trying to carpool when people have very complex schedules, it often doesn't work. I do think, you know, looking at the goals, if you could just refresh my memory, what is a transit, going back to my page, what is a transit oriented city policy? How would that look and how could that support the work we want to do here?
Yes, and so that transit-oriented communities is something that the Metropolitan Transportation Commission is looking at, and they're focused basically where there's oftentimes 15-minute or less service, and potentially 30-minute in some locations. And so right now, Napa doesn't have that much service in order to qualify under kind of MTC's overall policy, but that could be something like, hey, as it moves forward, we could push MTC, like maybe there's two thresholds, right? We're never going to have the service that comes every 6 minutes like Muni, but is there the rural equivalent, right, of the transit-oriented communities? And then we could get dollar support for that, but it would have an impact then on parking policy, because what they'd be asking you to do if you like kind of self-designated, so to speak, as a transit TOC, you might have to make some changes to your parking policy. So
It's subject, TOC specifically is subject to area communities or cities that have rail, ferry stations. We don't have those. We could opt in, but to Rebecca's point, it subjects the jurisdiction in Napa County would be everybody, I guess, to higher densities and parking restrictions around certain areas. The other item about TOCs, I can't remember what it was, but yeah, I don't, it will actually, big concern about this is it will influence potentially how much money in highway funds we get, no-bag funds. And so that is a concern by staff.
So being TOC designated could reduce our funding?
No, the other way around, by not having a TOC. Could
not
reduce
having a
our
TOC
funding.
Could reduce
Yeah,
our funding.
right.
Okay.
On the other hand, it trigger all these other requirements. So stay tuned. We'll try to fight the good fight on that because, you know, we're the only county that doesn't have a rail or ferry station. So
Yeah, we might need
and the
that
wine
kind of
train
exception
doesn't count.
to the rule, but I do think, you know, if the goal is to be able to increase to 15-minute, you know, frequency increments, that's a game changer. It's also a game changer to have free transit service in your community. Sonoma County, is it Sonoma County or one of the jurisdictions within Sonoma County has a pilot program? Can you talk more about how that's going?
Sure. So it's Petaluma in particular. So they have basically a separate, they have a Sonoma County Transit, right? And then Petaluma operates its own Santa Rosa. So they had some funds from PG&E and they brought some of their general funds, right, to the table to do that short-term pilot. I don't have an update in the past, say 3 months on how that's going or if they're going to continue it once that funding goes away. But kind of initially, right, they did see this increase in ridership. Kind of our concern as NVTA staff would be if we did a pilot like that, how we would get people to pay again, right, once something is free. We've had a hard time before making that transition. And so without kind of a long-term funding source identified, we weren't really prepared to make that change.
It'd be great to hear how that went, maybe in a future agenda item.
We can do
As we
that
talk
next time.
about this more, to hear the results.
Yeah.
I do think, you know, and I see the eyes and I hear Supervisor Director Manfree, because there's the implication of the greatest producer of greenhouse gases and methane, and that's our vehicles. And people getting around within the city and the county, but really in the city of Napa too. And I say that as a former city council member, there's a lot of need and there's a lot of opportunity. The other thing is that the county and a lot of the nonprofits give out a lot of free transit vouchers. And I'm wondering how much is the county investing in free transit vouchers, or even taxi vouchers, if that will, transportation vouchers, maybe even our local hospitals, because social services are giving out free transportation there too. What does that cost? And can we redirect some of those vouchers towards having more accessible, potentially reach towards free transit? I would love to see a day of having free transit. And I do support it coming from a general fund from, I can only speak for the county of Napa, and looking at what that cost would be. Again, there would be we'd look at what we'd be saving in terms of vouchers that we're already contributing in a lot of different ways. And then looking at what that cost difference might be, and would love to sit down with the city of Napa. I think there's a huge amount of benefit. And maybe it's a conversation between the city and the county too, in terms of what's a fair share in doing this. I'd love to see the numbers. What would that cost? Is it,
We can
way outside our
definitely-
realm, especially these days?
Yeah, we can definitely bring, for example, because the Napa County Health and Human Services Department, the
Exactly.
Farm Workers Department is, program is doing some, then we get some from SNAP or First Five or all these different programs. We can kind of look at them cumulatively. We can also look at the school district, because they're also through a bunch of different programs, right, buying different passes for individuals. So we can give you an idea of what that looks
That'd
like.
be great. I was going to mention the students because that's something else. And I shouldn't probably, well, I will say this anyway. So Director Sedgley's not here. I know he was very interested and curious what was going on in Petaluma and the free transit, especially for students, for youth. So it would
We'll
be
bring that in
interesting to hear that. I'm very excited about the goal of the new transit vehicle. I think that's excellent. I already mentioned the real-time signage, how important I think that is. I know that is an investment, but I think the sooner we can do that, the better. The trapeze software is super cool. I bet the young people will really like it. Let's see here. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. And I will definitely look at the Denver model, the RFTA, and see what they're doing. I know my daughter lives in Colorado model. Is it Aspen, right? It's Aspen.
Yeah.
So I have to look at the Aspen. But we go to these communities, and our younger adults, who I now call, 20s and 30s and probably early 40s now, based on my age. They really want this kind of system in their life. This is a lifestyle choice that they're looking for and they're seeking, and it's just healthier, and it meets so many other goals. So thank you.
Thank you.
One quick question, because I think the vouchers, the idea of free transit, I think my concern is you got to have a funding source, because it can't be a temporarily free thing. But that brings me back to the Napa Valley College arrangement, where we are basically providing free coverage for Napa Valley College students.
Yes.
Is there a way where we can track the numbers and say, is it really doing something?
Yeah, we definitely have, say, pre-numbers from the quarter, and then, or from, the fall, or from last year, and then we can compare it to this year in terms of the spring. We don't have a full year yet. We started basically on January 1, but we could at least give you at maybe the July board meeting, the half year, say, take January through June of last year and compare it to January to June of this year, specifically at that Napa Valley College stop, and let you know how we're doing. So we'll add that. We'll do Petaluma, HHS, and other vouchers, and Napa Valley College.
And the Solano Transportation Authority and their partners are just acting now on a reciprocity agreement, so that Solano County junior colleges students who have their pass can ride on our buses for free, and vice versa. So there's a lot of students that actually go between campuses. So that'll be interesting to see actually whether that spurs ridership as well.
And then the other idea with those vouchers, if, well, if the idea is that HSS can buy so many monthly passes, for example, and the farm worker programs, they're a voucher for the individual who now can drive or ride free. So it actually isn't as burdensome as saying, okay, you have to pay for a voucher, and then the same person in a different program has to, if I'm making myself clear, and I'm not to myself at least, is that might not be as expensive because in effect, all these different agencies and hospitals could all pool their resources, buy one voucher, and you've covered the same client in 10 different roles. So it may not be as burdensome as if we just went to Queen of the Valley and said, give us a bunch of money for vouchers.
Yeah, right. Any individual. It's like all they're getting support from a lot of
Yeah.
different organizations. How do you pool those resources?
Perfect. Other comments from the board? Any comments from the public? Yeah. All right. Well, then this was technically for review and comment,
Correct.
although it does look as if changes to Route 11X seem to be the closest thing to a no-brainer to increase ridership.
Yeah, so I think we'll plan on that for August, and then we'll continue this conversation about larger changes maybe for January. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you for the report. And I agree. I think it gets us all starting to kick around ideas, and in many respects, that's what we should be doing as a board. So thank you for your help, and staff, thank you for going through all the exercises to get us to where we're at. So, and that segues nicely to 10.6, federal and state legislative update.
Great. I'm going to try to cut this one a little bit short given the closed session. But on the federal side, there is still no fiscal year 2025 budget resolution. The House hardliners want a $1.5 trillion. They want $1.5 trillion in cuts. And I just had to, because the Senate is about $4 billion, which I think they're using as a tactic to gain dominance over the discussions. But that's I just want you to give you context to this, $1,496 billion difference. So I just wanted to let everybody know, because we don't always talk in trillions. In your packet is a letter from Secretary Duffy, the Secretary of Transportation, which threatens to cut funding to agencies prioritizing revenue sources to specific groups, and parenthetically, not adhering to the Constitution. Federal law currently requires that the agency provide services for Americans with disabilities and meet requirements associated with disadvantaged business enterprises. State and Bay Area transportation officials are at a loss of how to interpret the letter, and so collectively will proceed as normal until specific direction on how to move forward is provided. Ongoing challenges associated with federal staffing cuts are severely hampering the flow of federal funds. We've received notification from the FTA Region 9 administrator stating how grants would be prioritized, and grants that include items like NVTA's operating revenues for the Vine will be second priority after grants with lapsing funds. Still, there are significant delays, and it resulted in NVTA having to borrow $5 million from our RM3 account to meet Vine Transit operating funding needs. So that just gives you an idea. So we then won't be making interest on those revenues during that period. On the state side, you probably have all seen the May revise. The general fund deficit is currently calculated at $16 billion for fiscal year 26 and 27 combined. It could swell to $20 billion before the dust settles. That's significantly more than the initial estimate of $5.1 billion, but far shorter than the $40 billion that had been tossed around. So that's good news. Excuse me. And the shortfall reflects a mix of President Trump's blanket tariffs, largely resulting revenue losses from taxes on the sale of goods and income taxes due to negative market reaction, and also caused by the administration's various announcements, in addition to current and projected drop in tourism. In addition, there is an unanticipated $6.2 billion Medi-Cal overrun and delayed income tax payments from the LA fire victims. So what does this mean for transportation? There is a lot of transit funding wrapped up in the cap and trade, which is now called the cap and invest. He is proposing a 15-year extension to cap and trade with a sunset date of 2045. And he proposes a guarantee $1 billion a year of auction revenue for high-speed rail. And that does impact funding, in addition to funding that goes to CAL FIRE, that is going to affect transit. So we typically get about $1.5 billion from that program. And so some of the cuts associated with the low carbon transit operations program, and which we get a revenue amount from that program. And then also transit intercity rail and capital program, which is a competitive program, although we do get a small amount from MTC from that program. But it is going to impact us if the lawmakers are not successful. They are pressing for a $2 billion amount to rescue transit operators, so stay tuned for that. There's also cuts in zero emission transit capital program, which we've been very successful at getting revenues from because we're not yet subject to the clean bus rule. Let's see. I'm going to kind of skip ahead on this. There are some significant cuts to bike and ped and safe routes projects. So about their budget amount is $650 million in 25-26. This reflects a $400 million cut in 25-26 and $99 million cut in 26 and 27. And the only new expenditure is $17.6 million appropriation from the state highway account to support the 2028 Olympic Games. And I think that kind of covers all of the horrible budgetary things. We do have a couple of bills that we would like the board to act on. AB 1250, PAPN would eliminate ADA eligibility recertification for certain conditions that are not expected to improve and would prohibit temporary eligibility designation to no more than 6 consecutive times. It's kind of a moving bill, so staff is recommending that the board take a watch position on this. I don't think we have any fundamental objections to it. But again, there's lots of changes going on. So I think for now we'll just watch or recommend a watch. AB 79 Wiener, sorry, SB 79 Wiener has been approved by the Senate Housing Committee over objections of Chair Wahab. The intent of this bill is to promote housing and mixed-use development projects near transit service, particularly on parcels owned by transit operators. It further expands the definition of agency use within the Surplus Land Act to include land leased to support public transit. It also exempts from ZEQA any public or private residential, commercial, or mixed-use project on land owned by public transit. And staff recommends that the board take a watch position on this. We acknowledge that the league has opposed this bill, but it doesn't affect Napa County. If you look at the definitions in the bill, it specifically talks about tiers and it talks about urban transit counties, and an urban transit county is defined as a county that has more than 15 rail stations. So that I don't
We're
in the
15 away.
yeah, we're exactly. So yeah. So then the next bill is SB 569 Blake Spear. It would allow Caltrans to establish a dedicated liaison to facilitate the removal of homeless encampments on Caltrans right-of-way, or negotiate delegated maintenance agreements with local jurisdictions. And while NVTA has already entered into similar agreements associated with the park and ride lots owned by and managed by NVTA, this would expand it to NVTA, the cities and county, to address homeless encampments on adjacent highway infrastructure. And staff recommends that the board take a support position on this bill. Hopefully it will come with money. And then finally, SB 63, which you've already acted on, with taking a watch position. This is a Wiener bill that is guiding the revenue measure, or proposed revenue measure that MTC would like to put on the ballot in 2026. It only covers, it would be a voter initiative based on their polling. That's the only way that they'd be able to pass it, with a 50% plus one vote. And it affects only 5 counties: Alameda, San Francisco, Contra Costa, San Mateo, and Santa Clara. It would put what they're talking about now as a 0.5 cent sales tax, likely. I think there's some flexibility there. And the staff is asking the board to change its position from watch to support because Vine Transit connects to multiple systems that would benefit from these revenues, especially BART and the Vallejo Ferry. So that is the reason why we are asking you to do that. Also, MTC has asked us to float that by you as well. Happy to take any questions or review a particular bill.
What was that last bill? Sorry, number.
SB 63 was the last bill that,
That's correct.
okay. Any comments from the board, questions? So the action you're asking is to take a watch position on AB 1215, a watch position on SB 79, a support position on SB 569, and moving from watch to support on SB 63.
That's correct.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyone want to debate the merits of that recommendation? Or the way we didn't give any public comment, was there anybody who wanted to weigh in on pointing out that just because the revenues are going away doesn't mean we shouldn't be happy? Because I'd like to hear that argument, but okay, then if there are no other questions, I would entertain a motion to take the positions recommended by staff on those 4 bills. All right. Yeah, take a watch position, well, the various positions that staff has recommended on those 4 bills. Perfect. Any second? Okay. DZ, is it DZ or DZ makes the motion, McKee makes the second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Motion passes. You have that support. I believe that moves us to future agenda items. If anyone would like to have any future agenda items, then we will move to closed session. And Oz, if
Yeah,
you
the
need to-
board will now meet in closed session as agendized, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation.
All right.